Okay, well this video is going to touch on the subject of frustration, which is quite interesting because this is, well, I've recorded this twice and it's about a 14-minute video each time, and each time the sound's been fucked up, which is slightly frustrating, it has to be said. So let's have another go. I want to talk about Rebecca Watson's recent blog post entitled Why I'm Okay With Doxing, and I want to discuss the doxing and Rebecca Watson's attitude towards doxing and the issues that I have with that. But first off, I want to talk about punching people in the face, and if that seems a little bit left field there's a reason for that, and that's because Rebecca Watson makes this marvellous analogy that in just the same way that sometimes it's okay to punch somebody in the face, so it's okay to dox. Now, I always like to conduct my videos in an ethical manner, and part of that I regard as encouraging people to go and have a look at the original. I don't like to hide the original and just give you my take. In this case, let me say it's only going to take you a minute and a half, 2 minutes to read the original. I'll give you a link, go and have a look at the original and then come back to this video. Okay, so I'll proceed on the understanding that you haven't fucking taken a slightest bit of notice of what I've said, and I'm just carrying on with the video because I know that's probably what will have happened in most cases. So what happens with regard to the punching is Rebecca Watson makes this analogy, and then she shows this example of what she regards as a legitimate reason for punching somebody in the face. And it's not a self-defense, it's not because somebody's physically assaulting somebody. I'll show you the footage, and it involves Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut, and a conspiracy theorist called Bert Sibrel, and this happened about 10 or 12 years ago, something like that. I'll show you the footage and you will see what happens. This conspiracy theorist has got Buzz Aldrin under false pretenses, and he's having a bit of a go at Buzz Aldrin and trying to get him to admit that the lunar landing never happened. He wants him to swear on the Bible that he never actually walked on the moon. And he's getting in Buzz Aldrin's face and he's frustrating Buzz Aldrin. Not in the face the way that sportsmen or sports people get in each other's face. I know it happens a lot with association football, right in nose to nose. He's a few feet away, but he's still frustrating Buzz Aldrin. And eventually Aldrin cracks. Eventually, after a period of about 90 seconds, Buzz Aldrin's fucking had enough and he smashes him in the face. Now, if you look at Buzz Aldrin when that happens, Buzz Aldrin doesn't look intimidated by this guy. Even though the guy's bigger, he doesn't look intimidated. He doesn't look like he's doing it because he fears the physical threat. He's doing it out of frustration. He's doing it because he's pissed off with this guy and he wants to shut the fucking guy up. This is what Rebecca Watson has to say about this. Glorious. I'm a non-violent person. I think violence rarely solves any problems and more often only makes them worse. I'm anti-war, I'm anti-gun, and in many cases I'm anti-punching. But goddamn, did Sibrel ever deserve that punch? Now, I said to you that my reading of watching that is that Aldrin didn't look intimidated. He looked like he was punching out of frustration. As far as Rebecca Watson's concerned, she couldn't give a fuck whether he was intimidated or not. Sibrel deserved that punch. He deserved that punch because he was pissing Buzz Aldrin off, and he'd been pissing him off. He'd been in his face for around 90 seconds, and I want you to think on that. Now, there is a part of me, I know some of you will be thinking, serves the wanker right, and there's a part of me that feels like that. I'm kind of cultured like that. It's part of the culture that I grew up in. Some people label it toxic masculinity, and some of you know that I have a problem with the label there. But I'm cultured in this kind of idea that it's kind of okay to punch a bloke in the face. It's not okay to punch a woman in the face. I'm trying to get past that in my life now. As I'm grown up, I'm trying to think more and more that it's not okay to punch anybody in the face. It hurts anybody you punch in the face, and there's no reason to differentiate in that kind of a way. Now, I can't project on Rebecca Watson, and this is an important point. I can't project on Rebecca Watson and say what her answer would be had that been a female conspiracy theorist. How would she feel about Buzz Aldrin punching a female conspiracy theorist in the face on the grounds that she'd frustrated Buzz Aldrin for 90 seconds? I don't know. Rebecca Watson is a self-proclaimed feminist, and she campaigns and she's vehemently favours gender equality, so I would presume that she would feel that Buzz Aldrin is just as justified in punching a woman in the face as punching a man in the face. Bear in mind that she's citing frustration. She's not citing fear. She's citing the punch was deserved. Serves the fucker right for being in Buzz Aldrin's face. So that's what I'm presuming. And this is why all of this is important. This is why all of this really matters. Because in relationships, intimate relationships, friendships, yes, familial relationships, relationships with acquaintances, but especially intimate relationships, people end up having arguments and they end up getting in each other's face. I'm going to hold my hand up and admit that I've done it. I've got in the face of women before. Sometimes I've been in the right on the issue. Sometimes I've been in the wrong on the issue. None of that condones getting in their face, but I've done it. And I've also had women getting in my face. Sometimes at the end of the argument, it's clear that I was in the wrong. Sometimes I was in the right. But they've been in my face. Been in my face a lot worse. Bert Sibril was in this guy's face, and not for 90 seconds, but for 20 or 25 fucking minutes. Couple that with the fact of the way that domestic situations can evolve. Couple them with the fact that there's a whole gamut of behaviours, of confrontational behaviours within relationships, going from a sneer, or a snapped remark, or a raised eyebrow, or a tut, all the way through ultimately to killing your partner. Given that that's a continuum, right? There's no absolute break in there. Pretty much wherever you look, you can place another act, sandwich another act in between them. And we know that disagreements tend to evolve. They tend to move along that spectrum, sometimes quicker than others. And I contend to you that we need to fucking draw a line in the sand somewhere. There's somewhere where we need to say, sure, it might be slightly different from one situation to another, depending on the specifics, but we need to somewhere draw the line and say beyond this point are acts that are not acceptable unless the other person's already took it to that point, right? And you need to do it as a need to respond, perhaps for your own safety. Below that point are things that perhaps also we're not going to condone, but we're going to accept that people will go that far, and that's just a fact of life. And for most people, physical violence is the point where we draw the line. So this concerns me because I know in the future that Rebecca Watson will have discussions about domestic violence. And if her position is that 90 seconds of in-your-faceness, 90 seconds of frustrating your partner because you're being a bit of a cock over an issue is sufficient to justify punching them in the face, then I think she's going to justify a lot of fucking behaviours that she doesn't want to justify any more than I do. She will justify the behaviours of people that she doesn't like any more than I do. And I would just love to know how Rebecca Watson is squaring those two things and whether she's really fucking thought this through, or perhaps it's her privilege and she hasn't put the two things together, quantified what she's showing here, which is one guy punching another guy, with her position regarding gender equality, with her positions which I share with her regarding sexual violence, intimate violence, violence within relationships, as well as violence in society generally. This was just an example she'd given. I think it's a terrible example of jumping the shark in terms of the impact, but it was just an example she gave as an analogy to her doxing, and I really ought to talk about the doxing as well. Rebecca Watson has this kind of idea that with regard to doxing, it's not all entirely black and white. Sometimes there is more justification for doxing than others. In fact, sometimes to a dispassionate party, it may well be that there is sufficient reason to justify doxing. Kind of agree with her there. I kind of agree with her. But there are big problems here. And it's the same reason why, even if sometimes there may be a legitimate reason to launch a nuclear warhead on a target if it's sufficient risk, we don't do it. And the reason is that we don't want the escalation that's going to follow. And the escalation will follow, because for all this trumped up talk that Rebecca Watson gives us to these justifiable criteria, when it boils down to it, and I've seen both sides of the deep rifts discussion do that, when their side docs, they stand by the doxer. When the out-group person doxes, they criticise the other person. And that's how it works. It works on tribal allegiances. When it's the in-group doing the doxing, you stand by them. When it's the out-group, a different set of criteria suddenly apply as to what becomes legitimate doxing. Because after all, let's cut through the bullshit here. There's no side in that discussion or in any other discussion that takes place where there aren't trolls and shits and people that do things that they shouldn't on all sides of the discussion. So there's always a case to be made that you can legitimise it. But for certain reasons we don't do that. It's the same reason that we have things like the Geneva Convention. It's the same reason with the Geneva Convention why it deals not with how to treat other people, right? That's not what we're fucking interested in. With the treatment of prisoners of war within the Geneva Convention, we're not interested really in how we're treating the prisoners of war we've taken from the other side. What we're really concerned about, why we sign up to things like that, is that we want to make sure that our people, when they're taken as prisoners of war, that they're treated, that our people are looked after, that our people are treated to a certain standard. And it's the same thing with torture. For all these bullshit discussions we have, interesting though they can be, as to whether torture actually works, whether the information you get out of it is any good, the main point with not torturing is that we don't want our people to be tortured. And even if you're already involved in a dispute where the other side is already mistreating your people, once you lower your standards, right, once you legitimise doing something like torture on certain grounds, you have to accept then that for the next 50 fucking years, any dispute you get in, the other side is going to claim that their torturing of your people is legitimised because that's the way that you conduct your affairs when you're involved in military conflict. So it's a really dangerous game to play. And it's the same dangerous game to play here. Why? Because there are vulnerable people on both sides. And what do I mean by people who are vulnerable? I mean people who need to maintain some anonymity, who need to post anonymously or pseudonymously. And I think back to the discussions I've had on YouTube over the past 6 years with Christians, and I've posted and made videos as an atheist. Now I'm privileged, I'm in the same privileged position as Rebecca Watson, because everybody I know knows I'm an atheist. Everybody I know knows I make these videos, and most of them have watched at least one of them, either because they enjoy them or just to have a fucking good laugh at me, right? But they've all watched one of them, they've all seen one of them. I've nothing to hide from my employer. My employer knows that I have this channel on YouTube because I've written to my employer and told them. That doesn't make me bulletproof, but it makes me feel pretty secure. And any attempts that I have to keep my personal identity separate from my YouTube identity, it's not a real biggie to me. It just helps me to compartmentalise those two areas of my life, and that's all that it is. But I know a lot of people aren't in that position, that if their colleagues found out they're an atheist, if their family found out that they are an atheist, if their employer found out that they're an atheist, big shit could result. And this isn't just an atheist thing, atheist Christian, atheist Muslim, Muslim Christian. any kind of dispute, whether it's within the atheist movement, deep rifts thing, whether it's Gamergate, anti-Gamergate, whether it's bog standard left-wing, right-wing politics, it doesn't fucking matter what is involved, the same thing is true. One of the marvellous things about the internet is that people can get involved, feel enabled to take part in discussions where they wouldn't have done otherwise. They'd have felt worried. They wouldn't have felt enabled to have their say, because for certain aspects of their life, that would not be appropriate. And you might say, well, that's fine. They can just post politely and then nobody's going to dox them. But are you really that fucking naive to think that there's going to be no casualties in this? That this kind of thing cannot escalate. And then because the thing with doxing is it's an act of retribution, right? And you might say, well, there's legitimate retribution sometimes. It's still retribution, and we all know how these conflicts work out. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at Palestine, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at some of the ex-Soviet Union republics, it doesn't matter where you're looking at, you get this constant thing of retribution. And it's bad enough when you get loose cannons having doxing people. That doesn't help. It doesn't help when people stand by those loose cannons doing that doxing. That doesn't help either. But when people of the standing of Rebecca Watson a priori say that it is okay to dox, I think you're getting in really fucking dangerous grounds there. It doesn't particularly bother me individually, but it bothers me that people won't be able to take part in this debate, and people on all sides of the debates that I take part in could get hurt as a result of that, or at least feel they're not enabled to carry on taking part in that debate. So I put it to you that at the end of the day, the game just ain't worth a candle with regard to doxing. There may be the occasional situation where the retribution and good feeling you get from doing that is worth it. But most of the time, the responsible course of action, if a course of action is really needed, involves the authorities. It doesn't involve just publishing somebody's details on the internet. People are going to suffer if we start condoning this kind of thing. That's my position on that. I'm very, very interested as to what other people do. People agree with me on that, or do you think I've got it slightly wrong there? Also interested to know what you think about this face punching. It seems to me that if you're the kind of person that really doesn't want to legitimize violence, especially violence within relationships, the claim that simply frustrating somebody for 90 seconds and stopping them going about their business is sufficient for them to lamp you on in the face when you haven't actually laid a finger on them, when seemingly, even if you were afraid or stressed by that, that isn't really what's important. What's important is that you've been frustrated for 90 seconds. That really, I just can't imagine a worse thing that Rebecca Watson could have done in terms of an example there. I don't know if people are going to agree with me or disagree with me on that. I'm really interested to know what people think. Well, thank you for watching, and bye for now.